I'd also like to just take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting, beautiful Ngunnawal country that I've had the privilege of living on for a quarter of a century, so appreciate that. My PhD is in gamification and I've worked in this space for about 10 years. So what I'll be sharing with you is a combination of academic as well as practical experience today. We've been talking a lot today about the future of gaming and games and technology, and I'd just like to take a moment to look back as well. Why play? Why is it so important? Well, actually, we know that playing games has been part of human existence for a very long time. The top picture there is knuckle bones. There's evidence of humanities using knuckle bones for games as long as 7,000 years ago and then more. And knuckle bones are sort of, you see it in jacks and dice and this sort of game mechanic originating from there. In the sand here we see Mancala, which is a bean counting game that's quite common in Africa. Games have been part of our human experience for a long time. But actually it goes deeper than that. It's not just human, it's actually mammalian, and actually other animals play as well. So there's a lot of examples of play, particularly in like wolves and whales, cats and so forth. We see play typically in younger animals, but not always. And really, play helps us bond, it helps us develop skills, it helps us make sense of our world. We see play more often in species that have more complex social structures. So play and games are just so much part of our psychology and our being, which is why they're so powerful. I'll be talking today about gamification, but I just want to kind of put a bit of definition around it. So I like to think of gamification on a continuum of playfulness. So on one side, we have our real world that we know and love, with all of our, processes and everything. On the other hand, we have play. So play is defined as free form. It's imaginative, it's what children do. There's no rules, or you're making the rules up as you go. Play, very free form. A game is anything with some rules around it. So a game of tag or tips, very simple mechanics. I'm it, and then I touch you, and then you are it. But that's a game. So a game is rule-based play. And we see hundreds of thousands of games, from simple tips to World of Warcraft, or really, really complex games, or anywhere in between. When we apply games to teach something, that's when they become applied games. So simulation, serious games, game-based learning. Still taking games, but not for entertainment, but for a real-life purpose. Play is a real-life purpose, but you know what I mean. And then what happens is when we push that further, that's where we get gamification. And there's a bit of a spectrum there where on one side, typically when we do content gamification, when we're trying to teach a concept, it tends to feel more like a game. And then you can also get into behavioural gamification, where we're nudging behaviour in the real world. Like, a kind of boring example is like your frequent flyer program. We don't really think of it as a game, but actually there's points. There's statuses, there's rewards, and it's encouraging you to do real-world behaviour, which is fly with the same airline for longer. So there's a bit of a spectrum, and that's where gamification sits. And I'm going to give you a range of examples today. And then you're going to design a gamified experience for yourself as well. So I'll give you some background, and then we're going to actually design a game together. So gamification is the use of game mechanics and experience design to engage users and solve real-world problems. So we're taking the game mechanics, we're taking the components of play, we're applying them to the real world to engage people to solve real-world problems. A lot of benefits of games. I won't go of gamification rather. I won't go through all of them, but we get increased engagement, we get simulation, we get health benefits, and really at the end of the day, we get behaviour change, which is what we need to solve a lot of our complex problems. There's a lot of psychology behind it. If you're interested, I can share with you my 100,000-word thesis if you want to put yourself to sleep. But a lot of theory behind it. Self-determination theory is one about humans needing autonomy and relatedness and a sense of competence as core needs, and how gameplay fulfill those. Things like autotelic flow, when you're in an activity and you're immersed, you lose a sense of time and yourself, and games often do that really well. Positive psychology, this is not one that's sort of commonly used, but it's one that I use when I design gamification, and it's about increasing well-being and making it a positive experience, and then behavioural economics as well. So I've got 20 examples. I might skip some, but I just wanted to show you the range of gamification experiences. Some of these you'll know, some of these will be new to you. I start with Fitbit because everyone kind of is familiar with it. And again, these days we're seeing gamification just be part of everyday products. So with Fitbit, I could give you the research paper that says you should walk 10,000 steps a day. It's good for your health. It's not going to change your behaviour, is it? But if we put something on you, a wearable, one that gives you a really clear goal. So here the goal is 10,000 steps, gives you a nice progress bar where it starts with red, goes orange, goes green. It buzzes you when you reach your 10,000 steps. And, there's badges and other mechanics in there as well. Duolingo, I'm assuming everyone's heard of Duolingo. It's the world's largest language learning app. Learning a language can be quite intimidating, and so they've gone deliberately playful to make it accessible, inviting, non-intimidating. So in terms of some of the mechanics, the top picture there is what we call cascading information. So kind of breaking down and giving you information in bite-sized chunks. So basics 1, and then phrases, and basics 2. And there's other stuff there, but don't worry about it until you get there, and it kind of helps us step through that process. One of the mechanics that I think has made Duolingo so successful is this streak mechanic, which again we see in other platforms now, but Duolingo really was the first to do it. So essentially they say, if you want to become fluent in a language, you need to spend at least 10 minutes every day practicing. And if you come back and do 10 minutes every day, for 7 days, you get rewarded. And so you build up this streak. And I've met people that have streaks that are over a year because you've done it so much, you don't want to lose your streak, so you come back and practice, and that's how you learn that skill. So quite a useful mechanic there. Has anyone heard of Zombies Run? Yeah? Excuse me for my coughing. What I love about Zombies Run is doing the same thing as Fitbit. It's trying to incentivize you to go out and to exercise. But rather than using the points in the progress bar and some challenges and some badges, it uses narrative and story. The story is that there's an apocalypse. There are zombies out there. So basically, you put your headphones in when you go out for a walk or a run, and you hear runner 1. Quick, run and get some supplies. You're like, oh, okay. And as you start running, you're collecting items. So you're collecting things like weapons and medicines and other things that you need to survive the zombie apocalypse. There's also a visual build-up of a township that kind of grows as you exercise, and the story unfolds. And they have 8 seasons or something, so it's a very, very successful gamification example. And if you run too slowly, you start hearing the zombies coming up behind you. So fear, also very motivating. So Zombies Run, really great example. Feel free to check that one out. And this is an example of, it's probably more playful design than gamification, but speeding is a challenge all over the world. Most of the time we try to change that behaviour is through fines, right? Trying to punish the guilty or punish the naughty people. But so this flips it on its head. So basically, as you drive, your speed gets checked. Green thumbs up, red thumbs down, depending on if you're doing the right amount of speed. If you're one of the people doing the right amount of speed, through your car number gets entered into a lotto, and you could actually win some money for doing the right thing. Any guesses where that money comes from? It comes from the fines, yeah. So I really love that example because it's sort of flipping on its head a traditional way that we might solve some challenges. Superbet is an example for gamification for health. So this is quite a sort of science-backed one about what it means to be well, and it sort of breaks well-being down into these 4 components here, so social, mental, physical and another one I can't remember right now, but there's 4. You can choose a big goal, and you can break that goal down into little things that you can do every day to meet your goal. The other thing I really love about Super Better is it frames your challenges as bad guys. So for example, if the goal that you've chosen for yourself is eating healthier and your bad guy is chocolate cake, because you just love chocolate cake so much, you can make that into a bad guy, and then if you come across the bad guy, being chocolate cake in this example, you can say, did I beat the bad guy today? Did I lose and I ate the whole cake, or did I do so-so? And so I love that because it acknowledges that behaviour change isn't just a straight line, but it's got ups and downs, and it kind of, frames it in a fun way. I've got some more examples, but I thought I'd just throw a little bit of science at you as well. So why things are fun? So why is it that we've got knucklebones and backgammon going back thousands of years? Why do we continue to play games? Is because they're pleasurable. Our brain releases neurotransmitters when we engage with these sorts of activities. We've got dopamine, which is actually about the joy of finding what you seek. And there's evolutionary reasons why we're built like this, which we won't talk about today, but if you're interested, come ask me. We've got endorphins, and so those are released. It's an oblivion that masks pain from exercise and those sorts of things, but it rewards you as well. Serotonin is released in social situations, and then oxytocin, that social bonding, the love hormone, also gets released. Self-determination theory I mentioned briefly. It's probably a keystone theory in gamification, which basically whenever you're trying to design something, you want to make sure you're giving people a choice, like autonomy. This is a choice ability to determine your own fate. We want to show people and have them feel rewarded for getting better at a skill, and then a sense of connection with others. And these 3 are human needs that we actually fulfill through a lot of our experiences. This is the model that I use when I'm designing gamification experiences. So basically, whenever I design a gamification experience, I choose the top 2. So for any particular group or that you're trying to shift, what would be the top 2 drivers in that situation? Now, we're all driven by all of them, but the reason that this is so important is because the game mechanics that you choose need to be tailored to your audience. There are over 300 game mechanics, and you need to choose the right ones. And this is one lens to do that. So for example, purpose is about wanting to be part of a community, driven by something bigger than myself. When I've worked with not-for-profits and those sorts of things, they're often very high on purpose. If we then use game mechanics like competition, leaderboards, badges, points, doesn't really gel, doesn't really work very well. But instead we would use game mechanics like collective achievement, stories of impact, those sorts of things, and they fit better in with that driver. I'll just quickly run through them all. So cognitive, this is about curiosity, finding truth, puzzles, that sort of thing. Affective, this is about beauty and art and romance, and a lot of games coming out as well have just beautiful, beautiful artwork, music, or like really a lot of this aesthetic experience, because that's quite pleasurable for us as well. Basic or fundamental, we are mammals, so things like scarcity, you have 3 lives, the way we play when we've got 3 lives versus 1 life changes because it's tapping into this. We heard from Jess and Sarah about haptics, so when we're playing console games and we're approaching the area where the bad guys is, or they start shooting us and then the thing vibrates, it's like tapping into the physiology and it's really like physical part. Autonomy, relatedness, which we've spoken about, and then mastery and competence as well. Okay, a few more examples for you. Gamification can be absolutely analog as well, and I'll show you a hybrid example as well. This one's about how to get children to drink more water. So we've got a bottle with a digital interface on it as well. So basically, the more water you drink, the happier your little creature is. And you can also, if you both have a Galulu water bottle, you can little creatures can interact with each other. And parents get an update as well. How well is your child hydrating? Folded, so this is more of a serious game. Scientists have been trying to solve this AIDS-causing virus for 15 years, and the challenge was about the very many permutations of this protein and how it could fold together. 15 years trying to struggle to solve this. They turned it into a game, and it was solved in 10 days. So you can see, like, because you're making it fun, you're making it, into a game for how can you, puzzle and fold this protein, and it was solved. This is one of my favourite fitness ones called the Conqueror Challenge. It's a virtual challenge where you can do exercise. You could be running, swimming, cycling, whatever distance, and you can choose to do a place in the world. So, for example, you could do the Great Wall of China. That's a really long one, but basically, every time you go and do your exercise, you can log it, and then you can actually virtually track where you are on, through not Google Earth, but something equivalent. And you can see where you are. You get little postcards of information along where you're travelling. And every 20% of your goal, trees are planted or bottles are recycled, depending on what you've chosen. I'm doing the Middle Earth challenge at the moment. So they've also mapped, a fictional world. So Conqueror's Challenge, super fun. I'm not sponsored, I promise. I just love it. I'm going to just keep going a little bit. This is an example of a gamification that I did as part of my PhD. So this is working with teachers. And the challenge was, how do we get teachers to be more innovative in their practice? Teachers are really busy. They barely have time to eat lunch. How can we encourage them to to embrace new teaching methods? So I did this with a school here in Canberra. This was an A0 foam core thing stuck up in there in the staff room, so non-digital experience because they were out everywhere. And because we were looking to encourage innovation, we didn't want it to be competitive, we didn't want personal ranking, nothing like that. So instead what we had is team goals. So for the term, they wanted to share sort of updates on what this group was doing on Facebook. They also wanted to share internally with their internal Times, newsletter sort of thing. And they wanted to have meetings with other teachers to say, hey, we're using 3D pens. This is a really cool way. Maybe you should encourage this as well. On the right-hand side there, we had the Wall of Awesome. And this was recognising that the reason teachers teach is to have that aha moment, and that watching your students' face light up when they've learnt something, but that can get kind of eroded over time with lots of admin and parent teachers and blah, 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 blah. So we wanted the Wall of Awesome to just be a little moment where they could fill up that well again. So basically, whenever the teacher did a new innovative practice, these little hexagons were little hexagon pieces of paper, and students and our teachers could write them oh, thanks, miss, I loved how we did that, that was really great. And then over the term, this Wall of Awesome was filled up. I don't have the stats on here, but we looked at, there was an increase in workplace satisfaction. Actually, the amount of progress on the innovation projects was more in this term than it had been in the previous year. And there's also other stories about how much this was a touchstone every week for this group of teachers. So yeah, gamification can absolutely be analogue as well. This one's a government example. I'm not sure if you have lots of government people here today, maybe not. This is Party for Your Rights by the Victoria Consumer Rights Department. And they were looking at how do we educate people on what they can do. So if you've bought a second-hand good, what are your rights? How does government normally inform the public? Wall of text on the website. Okay, fine, understand, necessary. Please don't hate me, but it's true. And so what the consumer rights did is they turned it into a game. So basically, that's you're that little blue pixelated dude there, and you're having a party. And then, your fridge breaks. What do you do? And so you go through the information and you can choose options, and through that you're being educated about what your rights are. The other reason I like this one is because it's using this sort of pixelated format. And you're like, oh, that's cool. That's retro. But it's also a very cool way to get around a tight budget. So you can be quite creative because that's the reality of some of these projects. And this is probably the last one I'll talk about before we do a little bit of methodology, and then you're going to design your own gamification experience. Sorry, there's a lot of text here. You can read that later, but I'll talk through it. This is a project my colleagues and I did for the Australian Centre for Innovation in Agricultural Research for COP26. So ACR, a client, came to us and said, everyone just does like talks at these sort of summits. We want to share the really cool stuff about sustainability. They were specifically looking at agricultural transformation and sharing some of these principles. But they said, we want to do something different. So what we did is we designed a gamified experience for people to actually learn these lessons. So rather than saying, okay, what we know from research is so that you have a resilient system, you need to actually invest in both people as well as capabilities that are flexible. So depending on what the climate does in this chaotic system, you be ready. We could tell people that, but you're probably going to forget it. So what we did instead is we put people in charge and they could choose where do they want to invest. Do you want to invest in different types of roles in the community? Do you want to invest in different types of technology? So you could invest in people or technology and then something would happen. It could be a cyclone or a flood or a billionaire decides she wants to invest in your community, so both good and bad. You could choose and then you rolled a dice to see how much that affected you. And through that then, you're like, oh, a cyclone happened and what I invested on did not help. I'm going to choose something different next time. So we make people feel the pain or feel the pleasure, and then that helps them inform their next decision. This, I should have said before as well, was built in Mural. So like Mural or Miro, if people are familiar with that, it's a virtual whiteboard. Because COP26 had an in-person contingent in Glasgow, but also a lot of people dialing in. And so we said, oh, how can we do a gamified experience, but without having fancy technology like we've seen earlier today? So we made an entire game experience in Mural, which is like a free software. We had 185 people play, really, really positive feedback, and it was really great as well because it allowed a digital experience for people from all over the world to play together, but didn't take too much sort of investment in technology. I might skip through some of those if you are interested. They are in the slides. Yes, so I've thrown a lot of examples at you. I told you I always overshare. What these examples have in common is that they're about cultivating engagement, not commanding compliance. And there's a beautiful variety of examples and different challenges that gamification can be applied to. So I encourage you all to embrace play. It's part of human nature. So I'm loving the fact that we are at a play symposium. Okay, so now it's your turn. We're going to get designing. So gamification designed, when we go through the process, it's a 5-step design process, and there's a lot of creative people here, so you're probably familiar with this sort of process. The first step, basically, we want to get really clear on our intent. I'm going to ask you to solve a challenge. It could be a personal health or habit challenge. It could be a challenge at work, whatever challenge at all, up to you. I want you to think about what's a challenge you're going to solve. Explore is about understanding our people. So when we do this, or when I do this for work, the explore phase could be a couple of days to a couple of months, depending on what it is, but it's about really deeply understanding your users in context, their motivations, their drivers. Then we go through this fun make, test, learn phase, which is our design iterative phase. Today you're going to have a first go, and then if you're interested you can kind of continue to iterate that when you leave here. And basically once you have a gamification experience, you need to launch it, and then we also need to measure it as well. A lot more underneath each of those steps. I have a lot of sort of detailed design for each, but today you're going to just do a simple version, just a one-page version, and it's also something that you can then take with you after today. What you're going to do is you're going to break up into different groups. It's one idea per sheet. You can work on it on your own, or you can pair up with other people, perfectly fine. And I want you to spend about 10 minutes, think through what's a challenge you might want to work on. Then I'm going to give you a little bit more content. Then we're going to play with some cool cards, and then that's when we're actually going to get designing. So for the first bit, I want you to have a look at the left-hand side of these sheets here, which is your intent and your explore. Just a couple of dot points for the purposes of today, so that you can get a real sense for what it's like to design a gamification experience. So, over to you, about 10 minutes. Think of something yourself, or pair up, or go into threes.
Or is it more episodes of different super boring individual.
And now comes the fun bit. I always hate interrupting conversations. This is the last time I'll interrupt, and then the next bit you'll get even more fired up, I'm sure. I wanted to give you just a few more examples, and then we're going to get into the actual designing, and you're going to get to play with some gamification cards, because I've actually gamified gamification, so you'll have some fun with that today. This is Classcraft. It's a digital experience used sort of like high school or college, university sometimes. It's a way to kind of bring this gaming component into education. So students get to have an avatar, and we heard this morning about the power of avatars. And you can do quizzes and things as well. Teachers can actually also reward good behaviour in the classroom, and kind of add this gameplay, this narrative over the whole curriculum. So you could be learning, I don't know, history or something, and then you could say, right, through the teacher can actually generate a random event like an eagle or a griffin or whatever that is comes and attacks the class. What are you going to do? And so you're kind of adding this component. And I think that's, for me, really what gamification is. It's about applying this game layer on top of your real world. We can also use gamification in terms of simulations. So this one's about how to be a plant manager. Obviously, if you're managing a plant and something goes wrong, that's bad. But in a simulative world, simulation, you can make mistakes. You can learn in a safe environment. You're still triggering all those neural pathways. You're still learning as if it actually had happened. But of course, there's no real-world consequences. We're also seeing gamification for things like in Perisher My Ride. I'm not sure if anyone's used it here. Basically, the challenge that they had is when people go to Perisher, they tend to congregate around certain. I'm not a skier or snowboarder. What are they called? Slopes. Yeah. Okay. So certain slopes, right? And so the park was like, well, we have all these other slopes. We want to encourage people to spread out so there's not so much congestion. And so through My Ride, you can almost like collect the different slopes, so you can go around. There's also like lifts ridden, which is essentially badges, right? Rewarding you for the lifts ridden. And then there's also a leaderboard, so you can kind of compete with your family and friends or other people on the day. And it's all measured through your phone. Quitters Circle, this one's around health and supporting people who are wanting to look at quitting smoking. And there's like a peer component here as well. So gamification can be solo or it can be with other people. And I think there's a monetary component as well, like how much money you've saved and someone else can support you in it. I really like this quote by Roman Ruckwitz, who's one of the German gamification designers, which is it's about enriching the journey of a person instead of waiting for the finish line to reward them, which I really love. So now that you've got your challenge and have some sort of clarity about who your user is, let's actually gamify their experience. When I talk about gamification, there's sort of 5 key design decisions that you need to make. Who and what is essentially what you've just done now. There's also the level of playfulness. So gamification, again, as you saw in that continuum of playfulness, it's on a spectrum. It can be really playful, like your Duolingo, that's got little characters and it kind of leans heavily into that. Or it can be really kind of not so playful, like your frequent flyer, or even your Fitbit doesn't feel like a game, still using the same mechanics. I do a lot of work for government. Sometimes they're playful, sometimes they're not. And so the level of playfulness, you just have to scale. More playfulness isn't necessarily better. It's about what's right for you and your audience. The gameplay pattern, so this is about how do you actually win at this game? Is it a race to the finish? Is it points? Is it collaborative? And we've got the cards that will help you today kind of brainstorm around the gameplay pattern. There's also a question of scale. You know, is your gamification experience something that's played by an individual for half an hour? Is it gamifying, 70 people in a room for a day? Is it gamifying 5,000 people over 5 years? And that's important because if you're looking to gamify something over a longer period of time, you need to build in freshness and sort of resets. So for example, I built a gamification platform software as a service platform. I've sold that now, but that was being used by some government departments and companies like Amazon to gamify employee engagement, professional development, and I had companies using that for 5 years. Now, if you play the same game 5 years without any resets, someone new comes in and they're like, well, I'm on 1 point, and Stacey, who's been here for 5 years, is on 1 million points. Not very motivating. And so in that example, where the scale is a larger number of people over a longer period of time, we had like 6 monthly tournaments or resets. So the points and everything resets after 6 months. So it gives you enough time to like play the game and strategize, but also then resets and puts everyone back on a level playing field. And then finally, the platform. Is your game best analog, mobile, augmented reality, in the metaverse? You know, what's the best platform? There's no right or wrong, again, and all these design decisions work together. It's about what's right for you and your users. So zooming into the gameplay, I've sort of you've heard me use the word game mechanics. So I break it down even further into motivations, win states, how do I win at the game, mechanics, which is like what are the components of the game, and then dynamics, which is about how they kind of work together. And then you can also add a narrative or a theme. You don't need to worry about too much about that, but I'm just kind of painting the picture for you. I view gamification as, you've understood your user, their motivations, their drivers, the behavior that you want. We go through some mechanics, and then we get the win state at the end. And the cards that I'm about to share with you are color-coded in this way as well. And then just a quick note on narrative. Not all gamification needs a narrative. Gamification can work on points and badges and so forth. It doesn't necessarily need a narrative. Sometimes it's appropriate to have one, sometimes it's not. I'll leave that up to you for your gamification design. There is a lot of power in story and narrative, so I'm a big fan, but also is not always appropriate. And so the game can work, and the narrative is almost like a flavour on top, pirates, space, whatever. So the game should still work whether or not you have a narrative. And I really like this quote by Jesse Schell, which is that anything that can be measured can be turned into a game. And the last step of the gamification design process is that scale and the sort of evolving. You obviously have to measure it to make sure it's successful. That's a whole other conversation for another time. So I've got some gamification cards that you're going to use. There's a lot of them. I want you to have a look through them, and if you're working with other people, kind of discuss them. And then I want you to choose 3 motivations, 1 win state, 5 mechanics, and 3 dynamics, and a theme if that's right for your design. And so then by the end of the day, or end of the session today, that will be how your game works. Does that make sense? All right. So I have these lovely gamification cards here. Now, you do need to share them, is the only tricky thing. I don't have one per person, so apologies. I have 7 of the nice packs. And I have 3 of the somewhat dodgily printed on a piece of paper that I cut up before. So I've got 10, so I'm hoping we can kind of share nicely. So there's a fair few cards, so maybe while one person's looking through the motivations, another can look through the win state, or you can just play nicely and share. So I'll hand those ones around. Feel free, there's tables, hop on the floor, like whatever you want. And have some fun. So look through them, write down the cards, and if you have questions, please put up your hand. I'll just see how we're going for time. I don't think I have any. I have like 2 slides to finish, so I'll give you a good 20 minutes for this, so you can have like a proper time to look through.
I don't know if it's better or better. I was literally yesterday looking up.
I'm loving the buzz in the room. I always hate interrupting all the beautiful creativity, but we do have a schedule to stick to. And I am German, so I do like schedules. Oh yeah, is that the... Yeah. I hope you've enjoyed having a taste of gamification design. I hope you've had fun with the cards, and hopefully you can walk away with an idea for a concept that you can go forth and implement or think about further. So some takeaways. Gamification is an effective and an innovative way to nudge behaviour. It comes in so many different shapes and sizes, and if we had time, I would have loved to kind of have everyone share their ideas, because there's really fantastic challenges that are being solved in this room today. And in order to have gamification be effective, it requires a design process, of which you've had a first taste today. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed. Feel free to connect with me on the socials. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Thank you. It's lunchtime. I mean, like, it's so lunchtime now. Everybody's getting a bit hangry, as you should be, which is good because you're inspired. That's the reward, which is the food downstairs, to actually go